Hey everyone, this is Brown at IF Brown, and tonight we're going to be talking about the movie Silent Trigger on DVD. Silent Trigger came out in 1996, and it was directed by Russell Mulcahy and it starred Dolph Lundgren and Gina Bellman. So the very first time I saw this movie was a long time ago, and while I didn't hate it, I didn't really think much of it either. It was just sort of there. But fast forward several years later to where my interest and appreciation for B-movies had increased significantly, I gave Silent Trigger another look. And so one of the reasons that I took a second shot with Silent Trigger was because I've had a bit of a fascination as of late with the career trajectory of the film's director, Russell Mulcahy. So for those of you who do not know, Russell Mulcahy has rightfully gone on to be regarded as a pioneer in the area of directing music videos. And he had worked with artists such as Rod Stewart, Elton John, Duran Duran, Billy Joel, The Human League, a whole bunch of people. And he also had the distinction of directing the very first music video for MTV, which was Video Killed the Radio Star by the Buggles. So Mulcahy had definitely picked up a lot of artistic tricks, during his time in making music videos. And so when he made his cinematic debut with the film Razorback, what you got was an exploitation environmental horror film that had a very surreal, dreamlike atmosphere. And the film was all the more memorable for it. And so if you get a chance, check out Razorback, especially if you can find it on Blu-ray. You won't regret it. So he followed up Razorback with the film Highlander, which is a little classic from the 80s, or I should say a fantasy classic from the 80s, and probably one of my personal favorites as well. And both Razorback and Highlander, you could definitely see Mulcahy's artistic sensibilities coming to the forefront. And you watch those films, and you're like, yeah, this guy definitely has a background in doing music videos, and I mean that in a good way. So with both Razorback and Highlander, Mulcahy seemed to be on the verge of going on to bigger and better things. But unfortunately, though, his third film, Highlander 2, was a dud. And not just, for the Highlander legacy, but also for himself as a director. Because it's gone on to be regarded as one of the worst sequels ever made, to a point that other entries in the Highlander series have just straight up ignored the existence of Highlander 2 altogether. But after Highlander 2, Mulcahy directed films such as Ricochet and The Real McCoy, and while those films I wouldn't say were necessarily terrible, they were just sort of, they were okay, but they were disappointing in a sense that they lacked the artistic sensibilities and the promise that he displayed with films such as Razorback and Highlander. But then he made a movie called The Shadow, starring Alec Baldwin and John Lone, and I reviewed that movie recently. And one of the problems with that movie was that it came out around the same time as the films, The Mask and The Lion King, as I recall. And both of those films were box office titans of the 90s. And so The Shadow, unfortunately, had the sad distinction of being sandwiched in between those two movies. And so while it got some decent reviews here and there, it was a box office bomb in the financial department. And so that was definitely another bump in the road of Russell Mulcahy as a film director. And so, to be fair though, The Shadow is a movie that has gone under reevaluation over the years, and many people, myself included, regard it as a legitimately good movie, and probably one of the best films to come out of the 90s that had a comic book atmosphere. And so The Shadow, while it did not do well when it came out, it has been reevaluated overall as a good film, and a lot of people consider it ahead of its time. And so, there is a silver lining as far as, The Shadow and Russell Mulcahy's career, because while it didn't help him at the time that it came out, it is something that is regarded as a bright spot in his career. And so when people talk about, the successful work they've done, or at least, the films that they regard as good films, The Shadow is definitely up there with Razorback and Highlander. But because it bombed when it came out, that hurt Mulcahy's chances, I guess you could say possibilities, of having a successful career as a theatrical filmmaker. And so his next film was Silent Trigger. And while it did have some limited theatrical release in some areas, for the most part, it was relegated to straight to video. And so that right there, you know, is kind of a sign that some director, especially if they've had a theatrical career prior to doing, you know, direct to video, it's a sign that they're not doing so well. I mean, yes, they're still working, but they don't have the pull that they used to have, you know, usually, that kind of thing. But Silent Trigger is actually a fascinating movie, and it's better than I remember it being. And as I said, you know, I decided to check it out again, you know, around the time that my interest in B movies had kind of had an increase. And so with that in mind, I think that's one of the reasons why I appreciated Silent Trigger that much more the second time around. And it's not quite a good movie, but at the same time, though, it's definitely a fascinating one. And in some respects, I would argue it's a well-done movie in some areas. But also in terms of, say, the output of, you know, the actor Dolph Lundgren, he's actually pretty good in it too. And so also seeing Gina Bellman from Leverage as his second in this movie was fascinating, you know, because with the first time I saw the movie, I don't remember if Leverage was even on at that point, you know, or if it had come into existence yet. But, you know, when I watched it the second time, I'm like, hey, that's the girl from Leverage, you know? So seeing her and Dolph Lundgren play off of each other, that was actually pretty cool too. So the story of the movie kicks off where Dolph Lundgren's character, literally called Shooter, it gets an assignment to go to this building that's under construction. It's like a high-rise office building that's being worked on, and he's supposed to take up a position and from one of the upper story windows, and at a certain point of time, he's supposed to take a shot at a car that has a target that he's supposed to kill. And so he's also joined by a woman that is simply called Spotter, and played by Gina Bellman. And the two of them had actually worked together in the past. But unfortunately, though, their last time working together resulted in a botched assignment, and where they were supposed to assassinate a political candidate, but due to, you know, one Shooter developing pangs of conscience and having a bit of an existential crisis right at that moment, you know, coupled with the fact that said politician was holding a baby up, you know, in front of the crowd, you know, just kind of as a publicity photo, you know, that kind of thing. So obviously they didn't want to kill a baby, but at the same time, you know, they had a chance to take the target out, you know, prior to the baby, you know, being in the target's arms. And so, but they botched it because of, you know, Shooter's existential crisis. And so because they botched the assignment, they had to go on the run and fight their way out of the foreign country. And so while both of them survived, they were marked by the company that they worked for as, you know, failures. And so, in fact, Spotter had been assigned to kill Shooter, you know, because, you know, he botched the job, but she refused to do so, and the two of them worked together, and they were able to survive and get out of the country. But fast forward to the present day, and the company has decided to give them a second shot, and so they pair both Shooter and Spire together again, and to take out this one political target, which is going to be in a car on a bridge at a certain point in time. And they have to be, the target has to be taken out from the position that Spotter and Shooter take up in this under construction high-rise office building. And so, unfortunately, though, the building also has 2 security guards that kind of get in the way of things. You know, one of the security guards is a guy who's kind of by the book, you know, and trying to follow the rules and just do his job. But the other security guard is a guy who's batshit crazy and is constantly doing cocaine. And so so the 2 of them, they don't know that the shooter's in the building, but they know that Spotter is. And so Spotter, you know, she goes in disguised as a lab technician who's going to be doing computer work and trying to fix some of the stuff in order to, you know, make the building more accessible, you know, once they open it up for business. And so she's got a fake ID and everything. And so they know she's in the building, but they don't know shooter is. But unfortunately, though, the psychotic security guard takes a liking to her and repeatedly tries to track her down so he could have his way with her. And so, fortunately, though, because she's a special ops soldier, she's able to, you know, fight back and drive him away. But unfortunately, though, that's not the end of it. And so, you know, in between shooter and Spotter reconnecting with one another and sort of being hesitant to trust one another due to the fact that their last assignment working together was a failure, and the fact that Spotter had initially been assigned to kill shooter should he fail, excuse me, there are definitely trust issues between the 2, but also, you know, due to the fact that you've got a psychotic security guard roaming around the building, that doesn't really help matters much either. But then, you know, they also start to, you know, get signs that, you know, the company, you know, under the guise of giving them a second chance, is maybe wanting to just eliminate a problem that exists because of the 2 of them. And thus, in other words, maybe this is a setup by the company to take the 2 of them out. Like maybe the target does exist, but they're not meant to succeed. And so that's the basic setup and plot of Silent Trigger. You know, but at the same time, I gotta say though that, I mean, for so simple a plot, it's a very fascinating movie to watch because the majority of the film takes place in one location, which is this high-rise office building. But with some very good production design and some very good photography, they managed to make a single location, or a single setting, I should say, because there are multiple floors that they're on. But I mean, but it mostly takes place in one building. The result is a visually intriguing, you know, fascinating, you know, film to look at, you know, because I mean, the artistic sensibility of Russell Mulcahy, you know, comes to the forefront, you know, because you look at you look at how everything's shot, and once again you kind of have music video vibes. And so while the plot isn't that complex, it's you're kind of sucked into it simply because of the visual atmosphere. And also, one of the things that helps this movie a lot is the music score, which was done by, I gotta check the name, a gentleman by the name of Steffano Mainetti. And so he has a wonderful score that, you know, he composed and conducted. And it's a very, you know, at times eerie and altogether surreal score. And so that definitely punches up the artistic vibe of the film. But the director of photography, a guy named David Franco, I mean, he does a good job in, you know, punching up the movie's sort of, you know, dreamlike feel. So even though it's a simple setting, you know, it's never boring to look at. And also, we get a lot of mileage out of a series of flashbacks between shooter and spotter, and when we see exactly what went wrong, and we see that, and it cuts in between the present day and the past, we gradually get to see, you know, how these two came to, you know, not only work together, but actually kind of care for one another. And so there's definitely a camaraderie and a connection there that we get to see, you know, explored in the flashbacks. And then when we come to the present day, though, you know, you definitely see that they have trust issues, but at the same time, there's still a lingering, you know, care and compassion that they have for one another. You know, because amongst other things, they saved each other's life in the past. And so while they're on edge around each other, they also want to trust each other. And so that, and this is where it was fascinating to watch someone like Dolph Lundgren playing off as someone like Gina, sorry, get the name, Gina Bellman. You know, sorry, the names I gotta, you know, get, I'm still trying to memorize the names, right? But seeing Dolph Lundgren and Gina Bellman play off of each other was very fascinating because, in my opinion, Dolph Lundgren is a guy who is better at acting than people give him credit for. But unfortunately, though, he tends to be typecast and pigeonholed into, say, you know, one-note, you know, super soldier mercenary badass roles, or, you know, guys who don't say much, you know, just, you know, they rely on their, you know, physicality, because Dolph Lundgren's a very physical dude. And this was at a point in time when seeing Dolph Lundgren, you know, work on screen when it came to action scenes, this was when he was in his prime, I think. But also, though, while he definitely looks good here, he actually does a good job of playing his character. And he's not the most verbose of characters, but Shooter, though, you could definitely tell via Lundgren's performance that he's a guy who, you know, initially started off as kind of a no-nonsense operative, like it was all just a job to him, but somewhere along the way he started picking up pangs of conscience, and he definitely developed a bit of an existential crisis over the years. And the targets went from being just numbers and statistics to human beings. And so while he had no problem with, say, killing in defense, you know, killing just for the sake of a political reason or something like that, or killing just because someone's telling him to kill, he starts to have problems with that. And so while he's still in the company's employ, you get the idea that his reputation has taken a bit of a hit, or more than a bit of a hit, I should say. And so it's fascinating, you know, watching him, you know, trying to do the job while at the same time struggling with his mental issues, or his personal issues, I should say, his demons. And Lundgren actually does a pretty good job with that, and I was very surprised by that. And I guess I shouldn't be, because, you know, when you give him a good script, you know, such as, say, in a movie like Universal Soldier or something like that, I mean, he does rather well. Or, hell, even The Expendables, you know? But unfortunately, the majority of his work tends to be sort of, you know, one-note tough guy, you know, roles. But every now and then, though, you know, he gets a good script where he at least is able to convey a certain amount of emotion. And even though he doesn't say a lot here, in terms of physicality, he actually conveys a lot through his character. And so for fans of Dolph Lundgren, you should definitely check out Silent Trigger. And then we have Gina Bellman. My God, beautiful woman, and really good actress too. But this was back in 1996, before the show Leverage was even in existence, okay? And so she was beautiful in that show, but seeing her here, it's like, wow. You know, like, we're talking sort of supermodel type beauty, right? But here's the thing. She's beautiful, and she can act, okay? And so whereas Dolph Lundgren, you know, had the sort of strong, silent, conflicted type, you know, role to play, Gina Bellman, she also had a conflicted role to play, but she was definitely the more verbose of the two. And it's through her character that we get a lot of the emotional connections between the two of them, you know, because she gives voice to, you know, the connection and, you know, the feelings that they had developed for one another in the time that they had working together. And also, when it came to, say, the scenes where she's having to fend off the creepy security guard, she does very well there too, because on one hand, you know, you got this security guard who is a straight up psychopath and a drug addicted creep who is, you know, persistent in trying to have his way with her, and she's constantly having to fend him off. But she has there's an element of threat to her, to where it's like, I mean, yeah, she's a woman and everything, and she's at a disadvantage when it comes to, say, straight up strength, you know, against a guy. But at the same time, because she's special ops, she is able to put up a fight against the guy. And so while there's a bit of suspense in terms of, say, you know, how is this whole thing going to play out, I mean, it's good to see that Gina Bellman is able to sell the notion that she's playing a character who can take care of herself, or at the very least put up a fight. And so not only that, but in the action scenes, both in the flashbacks and in the present day, she handles herself rather well. And so I mean, I'm not a military expert or anything like that. I'm not an artillery or firearms expert by any means, but watching Dolph Lundgren and Gina Bellman, I keep wanting to call her Beltzman, I'm sorry, but watching Gina Bellman and Dolph Lundgren work together, you get the idea that they might have taken some, you know, firearms training or something like that, because they really sell the notion that they're a team, you know, not only in terms of how they interact with each other, but how they operate together when it comes to, say, the sniping and what have you. And so the two of them make a good team, you know, both within the film as well as, you know, from a meta standpoint. But also the actor who plays the security guard, a guy named, let's see, Conrad Dunn. Okay, so Conrad Dunn, he was on the show Stargate Atlantis. He played the character Todd, the Wraith. And when I learned that, I was like, dude, you know, because Todd was one of my favorite characters from Stargate Atlantis. So seeing that actor in this kind of role was kind of a shock, you know, because, I mean, he's straight up, you know, creepy in this and evil. And, you know, he's a character that at times is perversely entertaining, and other times he's just straight up terrifying, especially in a scene or two where he comes this close to, you know, raping Spotter. And so when those scenes happen, you're like, this guy needs to be put down. But at the same time, he is compelling to watch, though, and he sells the whole drug-addicted personality that, you know, his character is supposed to have. You know, like he's constantly snorting stuff, you know, constantly, you know, bullshitting his coworker. And speaking of, you know, the other security guard, he's played by a guy named, let's see, Christopher Heyerdahl, I think is how you say his name. But, you know, he was in a movie called Stripes, which has Bill Murray and John Candy, a whole bunch of other people in there. I unfortunately have not seen that movie, but I know he was in it, though. But anyway, he has a sort of subdued role, I guess you could say. But at the same time, it is kind of amusing to, you know, watch him interact with, you know, the psychotic security guard, as well as, you know, the character of Spotter, you know, because, I mean, like I said, he plays a guy who's, you know, just trying to do his job and, you know, trying to go by the book. And when he's having to constantly, you know, tell, you know, his coworker, he's like, I told you so, as in, I told you shouldn't have, you know, tried to go after, you know, the lady who's upstairs working on the computers, you know. But anyway, though, so it's kind of, he's amusing in a sort of, you know, dry, low-key way. But so yeah, it's a small crew of actors that we have to work with, and they'll do a good job. But and the action scenes are very well done. You know, because when someone gets shot in this movie, it's bloody, okay? And part of that is because of the gun that Dolph Lundgren has, or his character has, which really does have, you know, a setup like this. And I don't know what kind of gun it is, or even if it's real, but it's one of those things that sort of adds to the surreal quality, because you have a, you know, this guy, lugging around a gun that has, bullets that look more like anti-tank rounds than, say, sniper rounds. But at the same time, though, I mean, when you see him in action with this gun, I mean, it's just, the results are devastating and bloody, okay? Like, you get hit with one of these bullets, you're obliterated. And so the action scenes, I mean, even, aside from that gun, the action scenes themselves are also very well done. I mean, there's good fight choreography, there's good firearms play, and, when it comes to, say, the third act of the movie, when, say, Spotter and Sniper are going up against outside forces, there's a really good sense of choreography and camera work, and that's definitely something that brings the viewer to mind to film Mulcahy's film Highlander, because he was really good at doing camera work, combining camera work and fight choreography. But here, though, like in the third act, which is really cool, you definitely get kind of that vibe, but at the same time, it's more, say, gunplay than, say, straight up fight choreography. But the violence and the action in this movie are surprisingly well done. So now we get to the shortcomings, though, unfortunately. So this is not a bad movie, but there are some bad things about it, though. And for one thing, you have some very dodgy CGI special effects. And bearing in mind that this was 1996, yeah, I mean, it's going to be dated regardless. But at the same time, even for 1996, there are a couple of scenes that you look at in this, and you're kind of thinking, even for 1996, this is bad CGI. I mean, for one thing, you have in the flashback, you have a helicopter crash, which while the scene itself that it happens in is actually a really cool scene, the helicopter and the explosion, it looks terrible. Okay, and unfortunately, when you have something like that happening in a film that up to that point was doing a good job of looking sort of gritty and semi-realistic, it kind of takes you out of it, unfortunately, and it kind of reminds you that, yeah, you're in a B movie. I mean, going in it's a B movie, but up to that point, they were actually doing a good job of, saying, well, hey, you got this, artistic approach that's kind of transcending the, B movie that, well, Silent Trigger is. But unfortunately, when you have really lousy CGI scenes like that, you're reminded that, yeah, you're in a B movie. And so, yeah, unfortunately, I noticed that. It's like when it came to, say, explosions and things like that, it does not look good at all. And unfortunately, for me at least, it kind of took me out of the movie. I mean, not to a point where, the whole movie was bad or anything like that, but it's like I would go back and forth. Like, I would be getting drawn into the movie, mainly based on, say, the artistic atmosphere, or, say, the interplay between shooter and spotter. But then when there'd be an explosion, it'd be like, that looked, yeah, you took me out of it. Come on, that kind of thing. But at the same time, though, I think, there's enough good in the movie to where it's like, depending on your mileage, I mean, you may be able to forgive that. I mean, you can't deny that it's lousy CGI, and it's definitely a hindrance in the movie. But at the same time, though, if you're able to, say, appreciate, I guess you could say, a B movie on its own merits, maybe you can forgive that, or at the very least say, okay, that was lousy, but it doesn't necessarily ruin everything else, but it is a mark against the movie. But the other thing is, okay, so as compelling in a very, twisted way as, that crazed security guard was, I think a lot of the conflict in the movie could have been taken care of if either spotter or shooter had taken him out. Because, the fact that, he's going after spotter as often as he does, I mean, once or twice would have been bad enough, but we get to a point where he literally tries to rape her. And I'm not trying to, be all politically correct and everything, but at the same time, though, when it came to that scene, it's like, oh my God, because the intensity feels very real. And so, it's one of those instances where it's like, you're very glad that things turn out differently, to a point where, it could have gone really badly for Spader's character, but things happen differently to where she's able to get out of the situation. But, I mean, it's very intense. So when you have stuff like that happening, at that point you're like, dude, don't just knock the guy out. Don't just send him on his way. Just kill him, okay? You're both assassins. Break his neck or something. Hide the body. But the fact that they don't do that, I mean, I can understand, say, when Spader initially encounters the guy, she intimidated him into temporarily backing off and going back downstairs to bitch and moan at his, straight-laced coworker, but when he keeps on going after her, at that point, it's like, okay, this guy needs to be taken out pronto. And so, but because they don't do that, it kind of feels like, in the moments when it's not scary, it's just dragging with his character. I mean, that's not a mark against the actor, because the guy does a good job playing him. I mean, he plays him as this, coked up fiend, but at the same time, when you're like, the practical solution would be just to kill the guy, and you're kind of in your head yelling at the screen, it's like, just take him out. I mean, they don't do it, and it's not until later in the movie that the situation is resolved, but not quite in the way you expect. So I'll say that much for it. But the guy should have been taken out of the picture earlier. I mean, simply because of the situation, the fact that Shooter and Spader had a job to do, and they kept having to deal with this guy, and and he was constantly taking them away from their task at hand. But also, he was posing a genuine danger to Spader, too. So they should have just taken him out, after that rape attempt. But so the fact that his existence continues after that, it kind of slows the movie down, in my opinion. And because you're just kind of smacking your head in frustration as to why they don't just do the rational thing and take him out, But, okay, so the other thing is, okay, the surreal atmosphere, on one hand, definitely makes the movie distinctive, and it's one of the movie's selling points, in my opinion, with the production design and the camera work and everything. I mean, you have this industrial setting and everything that, at the same time, looks like something from a music video. And, I mean, and that's not a bad thing, but here's where it starts to kind of be a problem, though, because they do such a good job of establishing this sort of surreal environment, but then when it cuts to the flashbacks, though, you have some very brutal real-world violence, because you have massacres going on across the world, for one reason or another, politics, religion, take your pick. And it touches on that in the flashback that I keep going back to, and there's a very jarring scene where Shooter and Spader, when they're driving away from the botched assignment and trying to get to alternate coordinates to get picked up, they run afoul of some soldiers who are massacring civilians. And the way, I mean, it's done, it's kind of like, oh my God, I mean, that actually was shocking. And so, and you definitely feel the danger of the situation as well as the horror of the situation, because, we've just seen these civilians get, executed. And once again, when it comes to like the violence and everything, they don't, really skimp on, the consequences of it. And so you have this contrast between the artistic vibe of the present day in this office building, but then on the other hand, though, you have this harsh, gritty, real world vibe, dodgy helicopter special effects aside, in the flashbacks. And so I'm not saying that these two separate approaches don't work, but I think maybe if they, gather together to, come up with a different method of maybe sort of blending the two together, I think that maybe the contrast wouldn't have been quite as jarring in between, say, the dreamlike atmosphere of the present day versus the harsh realism of the flashbacks, because when it comes to, say, the time in the present day, I mean, you have that music video vibe, but then in the past, though, you're like, yeah, this is, real life wartime horror, that kind of thing. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I wish that they had done a better job of maybe gradually, say, merging the two tones together. I mean, I think it could have been done. I think that it would have made the movie, better, in my opinion, as opposed to, say, going back and forth, kind of like an emotional whiplash, I guess you could say. Okay, so the other thing is that, okay, so we know that Shooter and Spotter had botched the assignment in the past, and from lines of dialogue that they have, you get the idea that the company definitely wanted these two out of the picture for failing their assignment, because the price of failure is execution and what have you. So that being the case, how come the two of them have continued to work for the company? How come the company has allowed them to survive, for however many years after, their failed assignment? Because the film doesn't say exactly, how long it's been since, their failed assignment and, they're, getting together in the present. But at the same time, you're kind of like, well, okay, if you're a bad guy, black ops, company, I mean, if someone fails an assignment, usually, but yet they're still alive and working for the same company, and it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so, and when you find out certain things later on in the movie, in the third act, say about what the real agenda for certain characters was all along, that just makes, Shooter and Spotter's continued existence within the movie that much more confusing. I mean, not to say that, you want them dead or anything like that, but from the perspective of, say, a criminal organization, you're like, okay, if these guys were trying to, bump Shooter and Spotter off, why didn't they just do it immediately after they got back from their botched assignment, as opposed to, say, let them live? I mean, maybe if they had some dialogue about how, yes, they were needing to be taken out because they were becoming problems, but at the same time, they were talented enough to where we could have them do a few, loose end assignments, that kind of thing. Maybe if they had some dialogue like that, then maybe their continued existence, courtesy of the company, would have made more sense, as opposed to, say, this elaborate scheme to have them in this one place, and then having the third act betrayal come into play, and that's another thing. I don't want to spoil too much, but at the same time, you can kind of tell when a certain character or two has an ulterior motive, or you can tell that one of these people is not who they say they are, and the fact that you can pick up on that, it sort of takes away from the, I guess you could say, the impact that the film might have had they done a better job of, I guess you could say, concealing the traitor, so to speak, or traitors. But yeah, just the way it's done, though, you can kind of figure out, you have an idea of this character's not really who they say they are, and they're in fact, with the company or something like that, So it unfortunately is kind of predictable in that regard. So it can be confusing and predictable at times, but it's mostly due to, say, how the company's done. So you have this mixed approach, and when it comes to, say, like the artistic side of things and the gritty real world side, where they could have done a better job of trying to merge the two approaches together. And then you have, this confusing motivation of the company in terms of, say, keeping Shooter and Spotter alive, when it would have been in their best interest to just take them out of the picture, as soon as, they got back from their assignment. And so you're kind of like, how is this company still in existence if they continue to, let these dangerous people live, And when I say dangerous people, I mean dangerous to the company, because with, the skill sets that they have, I mean, they're clearly, dangerous in a combat situation, as we find out, both in the flashbacks and in the present, especially in the third act. And so I will say, though, that as confusing as the whole company motivation is, I will say that the third act, I mean, contains a really well done series of action scenes, in the sense of Shooter and Spotter having to go up against a mini army of bad guys. I think it's maybe, 4 or 6 enemy soldiers, but at the same time, though, I mean, it may as well be like a miniature army that they're going up against, and it's, very intense, very bloody, very well done. But also, yeah, I will say, though, that, I mean, regardless of the uneven experience, it's not a bad experience. Like, overall, it's a very artistic journey, and you have, some fantastic production design, some good camera work, some surprisingly good acting by Dolph Lundgren, even though it's a subdued performance, but he manages to convey a lot through, say, physical mannerisms and facial expressions. And you have, of course, Gina Bellman doing a good job in terms of, say, verbalizing, the emotional connection between the two characters. And you have, a wonderful musical score, which really complements the scenes in the movie, whether it's, something serious and intense, or dreamlike and wistful when it comes to, say, I guess you could say, the quieter moments. But I'm going to go ahead and give Silent Trigger 3 out of 5 stars. On the second time around, this is actually a decent movie. In my opinion, it could have been good, because if you compare Silent Trigger to Albert Pyun's Mean Guns, I think, did a much better job of embracing the surreal nature of the story and the setting, because Mean Guns just kind of leans full on into the whole surreal quality of the movie, whereas Silent Trigger, on the other hand, it struggles to find the balance between surreal and, realistic. And so I think that if they had maybe taken a similar approach that Mean Guns did, I think the movie would have been better. But I will say, though, that while Mean Guns, I think, is overall the better movie, I will say that the action scenes in Silent Trigger, in terms of, say, actually seeing the impact of violence and what have you, and seeing that it's not pretty, I mean, that definitely makes the action scenes in Silent Trigger better than the action scenes in Mean Guns, even though I think that the characters and the story and the surreal setting of Mean Guns were overall better than Silent Trigger. So, but yeah, like I said, 3 stars out of 5. And unfortunately, as far as, say, special features, I mean, this is more or less a bare bones DVD. There was like a bio of Dolph Lundgren, and I think there was like a little bit of showing what Russell Mulcahy had directed, but other than that, nothing. So there is a Blu-ray release for this movie, but unfortunately, nothing you can get stateside unless you have like a multi-region player or so, which I don't. But this Blu-ray, I think it's like a German release or something, but the Blu-ray I've read has some good bonus features on there. So if you've got a multi-region player, maybe you can find the Blu-ray and check out the bonus features on that one. So, but as far as the DVD goes, I had no problem picking this movie up. It was on the cheap, and and also it just, you know, I kind of had a hunch that, yeah, it's worth hanging on to. And sure enough, you know, second time watching it, yeah, I liked it. Not quite a good movie, but at the same time, a very fascinating one and a very memorable one, just in terms of, say, you know, the artistic atmosphere, as well as, say, you know, the beautiful and strange soundtrack that the movie has. And so, and also, you know, as a semi-fan of Dolph Lundgren, it's worth picking up because this is, you know, probably one of his better performances. And of course, you know, seeing Gina Bellman, you know, prior to her being in Leverage, nice. But yeah, so yeah, Silent Trigger, not a bad movie. Anyway, thanks for taking the time to check out my review. You got any questions, comments? I'd love to hear them. Please drop a line, let me know. You got any Dolph Lundgren anecdotes or I guess B-movie anecdotes? Hit me up, let me know. I'd love to hear them. So y'all got, if you like what you see here, please feel free to like and subscribe. So y'all take care, good night, bye.